So hey guys, it's Ziont again. Final Fantasy Failures Episode 4, and we're covering Final Fantasy X. I'm going to start sounding like a broken record with this particular topic, or at least this first one. But my main quibble, one of my main quibbles, I should say, with 10 was the lack of an open world map, and by proxy, the lack of an airship that let you explore the world map. Which is not to say that 10 didn't have an airship, because it did. And I thought the airship looked pretty cool. I thought it did some pretty cool stuff. I mean, it did help beat what amounted to the final boss. But there was no world map, and so there was no airship that allowed you to explore the world map beyond waypoints, which I thought was a mistake. To that point, the airship had always allowed you to go wherever it is you wanted to go and just see the world disappear underneath you. I understand why they took out the airship open world map thing for 10, because it was a more linear experience, and there wasn't really, they hadn't built a world between individual locations. In previous games, you had spent a lot of your time in the world, on the world map, going between town and town and town and location and location. That time in 10 was taken up by what amounted to just hallways with monsters in them. Which, you know, was fine because it wasn't completely linear. Well, it was. But again, the pacing was such that you didn't feel like you were spending a lot of time in between cutscenes and story elements. And you did spend a lot more of your time in towns than you did in previous games. So there was a lot more story to be told. But part of the Final Fantasy experience, at least to a semi-old schooler like me, is the airship and the freedom it allows you. And so that was something I really missed. Now, I would be remiss to not talk about Tidus and how annoying he is as a character. I did mention in my greatest game ever played video that when Yuna is not in the party and Tidus finds out that she's essentially walking into her own death for something she doesn't really believe in, he goes through this very distinct change in his worldview. And that makes him a good character. He's annoying. I think the voice acting was kind of crappy. And I'm not going to even go into the laughter part of when you're in Luca and he says, "Let's just laugh." That doesn't need repeating any more than it's been repeated. But I think they needed A, another voice actor for Tidus, and B, a little bit better writing. Except for that part in the Albed Sanctuary where he finds out that Yuna is headed towards her own death. That was really well done. And I think one of the other main issues I had with the game was, of course, the final boss fight. The argument is that the final Aeon boss fight within Sin is the final boss fight. There's what happens after that is more cutscene and story element than it is actual boss fight. But you're actually in the combat scenario. So it's a fight, and it's a boss fight, and he has a lot of HP, and his attacks do a lot of damage. But his attacks do a lot of damage, they don't kill you. Gravasia, Yu Yevon's only attack, will constantly whittle your HP down to by, I think it's a half every time, or maybe a quarter. But it can't kill you, as far as I know. I think maybe if it gets your HP low enough, it'll start doing 1 damage, and you'll die at 1 HP. But you have auto life, permanent, and so you can't lose the fights, even though you're fighting all your Aeons, and they do upwards of 17,000 damage if you've broken the damage limit on some of them. And again, it's a symbolic fight, much in the way that Necron is a symbolic fight. But I think that Necron succeeded where Yevon fails, in that you can actually lose the Necron fight. He is this personification of nihilism and annihilationism that Kuja's desperate attempt to justify his existence or lack thereof brought about. With Final Fantasy X, you're essentially killing a religion when you kill Yevon. You're not killing a person who wants to destroy the world, you're killing someone who wants to save it. So you are yourself an annihilationist when you kill Yevon. Now, it does bring about the eternal calm, and there is a lot of celebration, and sin disappears. But I kind of wish that the party could have failed there. Or at least some of the party could have failed. And that had they failed, they would not have been there afterwards. That the KO or the knock or the killing of that particular character would have had an effect on the actual in-game or in cutscene. That Tidus, as a dream, is impossible to kill because he is not actually real. He is a thought-generated being, and as essentially material thought, he's impossible to kill. The rest of them aren't, except for Auron, of course, who's already dead. So, if just those two had survived because the rest of the party was KO'd, I would have been fine with that, or at least more fine with it. But that wasn't the case, and the final boss fight served only as an end that you've spent a lot of time going through the means for. And the last thing I think I have against that game is the ultimate weapons and the challenges you have to complete to get them. Get them, of course, being the wrong phrase. You don't actually acquire them through any minigame. What you do is you have to unlock their potential by doing minigames. And some of the minigames are so outright challenging and frustratingly challenging that most people didn't do it. For example, in order to unlock the capabilities of Tidus's final sword, whose name I will never be able to pronounce, you have to finish a chocobo race in the Calm Lands with a total time of 0 seconds, using a whole bunch of time reduction balloons. The controls on the PS2 were crappy enough, and the birds that increased your time fast enough that it became an exercise in patience and ultimately just a worthless experience. You could beat the game without break damage limit just fine, and you wouldn't have to go through the constant frustration of trying to dodge 100 lightning bolts on the Thunder Plains without missing once. I'm all for putting in challenging minigames. What I'm not for is putting in challenging minigames that are so reflex-based and failure-oriented that they're just frustrating, that there's no reason for them. There's an argument for them somewhere, like, I don't know, you want to fight the animal monster farm monsters, but there's no reason to frustrate and anger your players if the whole point of your game is to tell a story and to entertain. And just so you know, frustration isn't particularly fun.